Okay, so here's a video showing you how the Sulastic Shackle goes on a 2019 Silverado 3500 HD. I should point out this isn't an install video, although I will show you some pictures regarding the install. Really what I wanted to show you is a comparison between how the stock Shackle rides versus the Sulastic Shackle going down the same road. I should point out right away, I think it made a noticeable difference. It'd be the same price to do some upgraded shocks. In fact, it could be more to do upgraded shocks on your truck. I thought this was worth it. It doesn't take away the tiny little vibrations and just this tiny bits of road bouncing. What it does do is if you hit a pothole, a speed bump, or any of just those slightly larger than normal bumps going down the road, you'd normally feel kind of a punch in the back from the rear end bouncing. And this seems to have eliminated that, which I'm really happy about. That's just one thing that's a huge pet peeve for me. So I think it's worth it. I wanted to point out a couple things here in the pictures. When you do the install, I highly recommend removing the spare tire. It's in the way of reaching these bolts that you need to get the shackles out with. Also, if you're doing it on the Chevy, there was this small piece of metal that got in the way and I had to trim it. No big deal. Easy, it doesn't affect anything. Just wasn't expecting it, so then I had to go get a die grinder and that. In terms of tools, like you're going to want a floor jack and you're going to want some tall jack stands probably. This isn't like your standard toolbox job. You do need die grinder, impact, floor jack. Some of these things are a little bit above average, but it wasn't hard to do. I would feel totally comfortable doing this again, and just doing it my first time, it took couple hours, but I think I could do it in under an hour next time because I know all the things I needed to have ready. So feel free to go for it, but just be prepared that it does take a little bit of finagling and working to get the bolts out, and then it'll go back together just fine. So here's the filming going down the road, and I put a GoPro on the shackles before and after the install to try and get a comparison. I tried to go the same speed going down the road so that it would be as close, with the filming as possible, but that's going to get a little bit off. The idea here, though, is just to show how the truck handles these little bumps. You still see that the leaf spring moves, the shock moves, and honestly, over these little bumps, they kind of respond the same. You see how the stock shackle, it sways back and forth, and that's why it's there, is because its way of taking some of these smaller bumps out of the frame is by swaying back and forth, and that's exactly what the Sulastic shackle does too. It sways back and forth. It doesn't really engage that rubber bushing until you hit some larger bumps. I should say, before anything else, I have a stock 3500 HD. I haven't touched my torsion arms. I haven't lifted or leveled the truck at all. So it really has a great ride. I'm just really looking to get some of these big punches in the back out of the way. The road I drove down is California Avenue in Salt Lake City when I thought about a road that would work well for this test. Of course, right next to my work, California Avenue, it's like the prime example of how not to build a road. It is so rough. So you start to see, as we went over some of those bumps, the rubber bushing on the shackle starting to engage. A lot more movement coming out of the shackle when we hit some of those bigger bumps, and I think that's what we noticed the most here. When I also hit some of these bigger bumps, you'll notice that the camera shutters, it's just attached to the body of the truck. So any movement the frame is getting is going right into this camera and either that vibration. And so when we hit some of this bigger stuff, I think you'll notice how the camera shutters and shakes a little bit. I was surprised as I did this that I still see the shocks moving and engaging. Makes me think that perhaps the next step would be to put on some shocks. That might help a little bit as well. So first big bump coming up here. This is the railroad tracks. We should be able to see quite a bit of movement. There's a pretty big difference there. You notice first the camera shakes quite a bit, and then you saw how the leaf spring moved a lot more on the stock shackle, and the Sulastic really absorbed a lot of that. Another railroad track. Nothing too major there. I actually recently repaired that, which is nice because it was terrible. Then I'll get on the freeway and we can watch as we cruise around on 215 for a little bit. Honestly, the road was fairly smooth despite the little things, so I don't think we'll see a lot here, but we'll watch it through until I get off of this off-ramp just so you can see what it does going at freeway speeds. ironically. Both times I got on the freeway, I had people trying to come over into my lane. I didn't really want to get slowed down for my test, so I sped up. I mean, not a lot happening here. Wish I could have maybe found a real rough patch, giving you a better example, but I'm pretty pleased, honestly. I think it was worth the money. I mean, to get some really nice shocks, you would have spent just as much as well. And as I've been driving it in the days since, these big bumps, they just have not been noticeable. It's really interesting. And in this test I'm about to do with the speed bumps, sometimes the rear end actually hits softer than the front end, which is really neat. Another note is when I installed these, my rear end raised 3/4 of an inch. After driving around for the rest of the day, it dropped down to 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. So it was right exactly where the instructions said it would be. So it didn't raise my truck at all, which I was happy about. Let's transition. I'll show you what it's like going over a speed bump, and that'll do it. Now here's the speed bump. I went over 2 different speed bumps, but they're both very similar because you go across them about the same speed. One's a curb cut and one's an actual speed bump. So we'll see as they move with the front end a little bit and then the rear end. And the biggest thing I think you'll notice is how much the camera shakes, which shows on that stock shackle. That's that punching in the back we normally feel right here. I mean, that Sulastic it just very smoothly moved through it. So I think it does take away a lot of that punching you normally feel in the stock shackle.